Hey everybody, welcome back. Today we're going to be taking our first in-depth look at the Pandas data analysis package within Python. It's going to be a pretty high-level introduction to Pandas. We're not going to be doing anything terribly complex today, just kind of dipping our toes in the water. I know that I've used Pandas several times so far without really explaining much about it, other than it's kind of a Python version of Excel is an easy way to think of it. Although truth be told, it is much more than that. That's just a simple way to think of it from the beginning. So let's go ahead and dive in and take a look at what we have. So first things first, we're going to want to pull up the documentation, of course, because we're looking at a new package. Pandas.pydata.org is what we're looking for, and I'll link this down in the description, so you'll just be able to click and won't have to type it in off of there. And Pandas is going to have a very clean, very user-friendly interface for their documentation. You can come straight here and search the docs. Getting started, if you've never used Pandas before, if your only exposure is what we've done in this video, getting started is a good place to start. They have a separate user guide, API reference, and developer guide. We're going to go ahead and hit get started. We're just going to kind of hit some of the basics of what Pandas is before we hop in and start doing anything with it. So first things first, Pandas allows you to work within data frames. An easy way to think of a data frame is just a table, tabular data. If you're working in Excel, it would be just like a sheet within your workbook. Your data frame is going to have rows and columns. You have your headers up top, your column name, just like you would if you had a table in Excel. And then you have your index over here, which is how you index the rows themselves. And you can specify how you want your data indexed. The default, if you don't define it, it's just going to be a numerical list starting with 0, because Python starts with 0, and just goes 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, all the way up. You can read and write data from all sorts of different formats. So even if you're not a huge fan of using Pandas to do your actual analysis in the data, and you're much more comfortable in Excel, I know I've come across many, many instances where I just have a data format that is not playing nice with the other software that I need to use it for. So at a very, very basic level, I think everybody would benefit from knowing a little bit of Pandas simply because it allows you to convert file types very simply. You can read in several different file types and get your data frame, tweak it however you want to make sure it looks right, and then export it to whatever other data type you want. You're able to select subsets of your table to create a new table of just that specific subset. You can do plotting. Matplotlib is probably what we're going to be using. Yep, that's what they have here, matplotlib. So we'll go over that towards the end of the Pandas tutorial, not today, but this video series, to give you an idea of how to do some basic plotting there. I don't do a ton of plotting in general, other than to just kind of, truth check myself and make sure that what I'm thinking in my head based on the tabular data actually makes sense with a visualization. But you can have some very complex plots within here as well. It's not just simple. You can add columns, you can create columns based off calculations of other columns. It's very similar to Excel. I think anything that you can do in Excel, you can do in Pandas probably faster, to be honest with you. That's just what I just want to give you kind of a brief overview there before we hopped in. And again, I'll link the documentation page in the description below. So if you have seen something here we didn't click on, or you want to go into this a little bit more, because they have actual tutorials for each of these topics, we're just not going to go through those today. So back to our intro. Just like all of our other Python videos here, we need to import pandas. We're going to import it as PD. And then we need to bring in our file that we want to read. So I'm going to bring in this box score file. I pulled it on August 8th, so it's a little over a month old. Not a huge deal, just to show what we're working with here. It's going to be this table, and as you can see, we've got 19,873 records in it because it's every player that had a box score this season up through August 7th. So we're going to do df is kind of the universal way of calling a data frame. It's just a variable that you define. You can name it whatever you want. For easy readability, though, it's usually some derivation of df for data frame, and you can have the type of data frame out front, box scores df, box scores underscore. Like it's just a variable. Make it whatever you want. I usually start with my baseline one coming in as just df, and then branch off of there with subsets of that named separately. So to bring in a file, it's just pd.read underscore, and then the file type. And if you're using Excel, it's Excel. CSV, it's CSV. If you're using something else, you just want to double check the documentation and make sure that you're pulling in using the right keyword there so Pandas understands what you're trying to say. We're going to shift right click to copy as path. Save us some time there. Pretty simple. So we'll go ahead and pull that in and double check it. Our data frame here, we can see is our Excel spreadsheet here. All right. Got all that information now in our data frame. Cool. So there are a couple of key commands, functions that you'll want to learn in Pandas right off the bat. First is going to be head and tail. df.head is going to give you by default the first 5 records of your table. df.tail is going to give you the last 5 records of your table. Now you can specify if you'd like more or less than that. Maybe you want the first 15. You just put in however many you want in that parenthesis there, and that'll give you that many records from the top of your table, however it's sorted by at that time. Right now we're just sorted by the default index, which is how it was brought in. You can sort by any of your other columns as well. You could make the player the index if you wanted. All sorts of things we can do there. Don't want to be in full screen. So that's how we would take a look at the first 5. The next one we'll want to learn is df.describe. df.describe is going to give you a real quick statistical summary of whatever data you have. And this is going to be very, very helpful command to know for dealing with statistics, especially, professional sports statistics. Because you can real quick, just by running that, get all of this information for each of those columns. You don't have to run it for every column. I want the average of this, the average of that, the average of everything. It already breaks it out for you in a 1-line command. Okay, so that's pretty helpful. Another thing that's going to be very helpful for us is going to be info. Info is going to run you through each column, tell you how many of them are non-null, and going to give you the data type of that column. This might not seem terribly helpful now, but when we get into more of the machine learning aspect of this and preparing our data for those types of algorithms, we're going to have to be very careful about the data types that we have. So that's a quick, easy way to check and see if you're missing any data. Because you can see here we have 19,872 of them. And we can see here that all of them are non-null, which is good. That means we're not missing data. So if you're using data that's not already cleaned up, because obviously downloading box scores, this is already cleaned up, professionally prepared data from the NBA. In the real world, it's very likely that you have data that is not professionally prepared for you. So learning how to use the info command and how to navigate through this and understand what it's telling you can be very helpful. Moving on from the basics there, we're going to do a little bit of manipulation here. Let's just go ahead and create a couple more cells. So we've got the room. So maybe thinking that's great and that's dandy, but how easy is it to actually look at specific players' stats? Because that's obviously what the name of the game is here. How is each player gonna perform? It's cool to see across the entire NBA, the average player plays 24.5 minutes, scores 11 points, 4.5 rebounds, 2.5 assists, 3/4 of a steal and half a block, and 1.5 turnovers a game. That's cool across every player that's played in the NBA this season. But that doesn't give us a lot of functional information to build anything. But fortunately for us, it's very easy to slice your Pandas dataset and select out different datasets and data frames to be able to work with. It's as simple as defining a new data frame as a subset of your existing data frame. So we've named our initial data frame df. We don't want to change what df is. That way we'd never have to reload our spreadsheet, because if we were to change what df was, we lose that raw input. So df we're going to view as its own thing, and it's going to stay there. And anything we want to do on top of that, we're going to create a new data frame for. So let's say we wanted to look at James Harden. James Harden's a pretty regular top scorer in daily fantasy sports, so it's pretty likely that you're going to be interested in how he's going to do. So we can name a new data frame, Harden df equals df. And so the way we do this is we define that data frame. And what we're doing now within these list brackets is saying what we want from the original data frame. So think of it in plain English that we are basically saying, I want to look at the results from the table df where the column player equals James Harden, where the column, where the value in the player column equals James Harden. All right, so this line here in English is what this is saying. All right, so we're going to run that, and then we're going to see if it works. Harden df dot head. There we go. So now we're just getting our James Harden values. And that's obviously just the first 5. We can go 15. Okay, so these are every game that James Harden has played this year. Just going to do that. Now, that's nice. We now have our separate data frame. If we look back at our initial df, it stayed the same. It didn't change. All we did was pulled out the specific subset of James Harden stats and put it in a new data frame. And now we can do the same thing as we did before, and now we're just looking at James Harden stats. So for reference, we can see that the average minutes played for an average NBA player is 24.5 minutes, whereas James Harden is almost 37 minutes. James Harden averaged 34 points a game. The average NBA player is 11 points a game. So you can see how this would be pretty useful. We can see his averages specifically. We can do this for any player. We can use it to compare players and their averages. We can go back to looking at their game specifically. So if we're looking at Harden DF, we have 65 games. So let's say we only wanted to look at games where he played more than 30, let's see, what was his average minute? More than 36.677. Harden DF. Oh. Harden min DF equals, I don't know. Let's break it off into points because I want to show you another thing that we can do. So we looked at how we can average this whole season, right? So let's look back at our box scores. DF. Okay. So now how do we, this is nice, but we need fantasy points, right? So to define a new column, it's just going to be DF fantasy points. And that's going to equal DF points. Because you get 1 fantasy point for every point you have, plus, let's see, is it 1.2 times DF, and pardon me if I get one of these wrong. I'm remembering off the top of my head the scoring mechanisms for FanDuel. I believe it is 1 point for every point they score, which they obviously break it in. You know, you get 2 points for a normal field goal, an extra point if it's a 3-pointer, and then 1 point for a free throw, which obviously breaks down to 1 fantasy point per point that you score. But I believe it's 1.2 for rebounds, 1.5 for steals and blocks, And we're going to keep these separated just for clarity, or for assists. And no, it's 1.2 for rebounds, 1.5 for assists. Or is it 1.2? I know steals are 3. I don't remember if blocks are 3. We'll pretend blocks are 3 as well. Probably wrong, but you understand the point of this is to show how to set it up here, not necessarily this is going to be accurate. This specific instance is going to be accurate. Obviously, you can make it accurate. And then we minus df turnovers. Okay. Now let's run df again. All right, so now we have fantasy points. And again, this, I may have been off on the factors. I have not looked that up in a while. That's just my rough remembrance off the top of my head. But either way, everyone here is scored the same using that, so it's going to be relative to each other accurate. Now let's say we only want to look at our high performers, and let's say you're building a system where you want to specifically look at any player who scored over 50 points on any given night. Because that's going to be kind of a big threshold there, is if you can get up to 50 or not. Let's call it df50 equals df e greater than or equal to 50. All right, now let's look at our df50. Oh wow, we had 879 player instances, not separate players. 879 instances of a player scoring over 50 points. It's pretty impressive. So now we can look and see, well, of those, what is the average? Okay. So the least amount of time it took someone to score 50 fantasy points was 20 minutes. Someone did it with only 5 points. Someone did it with no rebounds, no assists, no steals, no blocks, no turnovers. And obviously the minimum is 50 itself. And we can go through each of those. So the highest point total was 61. The highest rebound total was 24, 18, 7, 10, 11, so on and so forth. Highest fantasy point value up to that point was 88.8. So that's a good way we can kind of look at it. Look at df50 again. Yeah. So yeah, that's going to be pretty much it for today. I just wanted to give a quick overview into Pandas and how we can use it to get a little bit better idea of the data we have and how we can use it. And sorry if you hear the rain hitting the window. It just started raining pretty hard outside here. But that's it for today again. We'll be getting a little more in depth into things we can do with Pandas, like get running totals, running averages, running means. So I know when I first started, I would make so many data, and it was automated, of course, but so many data frames count back like the last 7 days, 10 days, based on the date the game was played. And then I discovered that there is a command in Pandas that will just give you a rolling average over the last however many records you want for that player. Life-changing. So Pandas is one of those things that it really, you're only limited by how much time you want to put into learning it, because there is always something new and different that I'm learning still to this day. So that's it. See you guys in the next one.